It starts the same way for millions of men. A phone lights up, a screen flickers, and a promise of just 1 minute quietly becomes an hour. He sits down with good intentions. He opens the book, the report, the plan, the notebook where his future is supposed to take shape. And yet, before the first page is finished, his hand moves almost by itself. A message, a video, a headline, another dose, another interruption, another piece of his life stolen without a fight. At first, he does not call it weakness. He calls it stress. He calls it being busy. He calls it modern life. But deep inside, he knows the truth. A man who cannot hold his attention cannot hold his destiny. Because every great thing a man ever builds begins in silence, in concentration, in the ability to stay with one thought long enough to turn it into something real. I once knew a man who could talk for hours about what he wanted. He wanted to get fit. He wanted to build a business. He wanted to write the book, fix the marriage, become the kind of man his children could respect. His eyes would sharpen when he spoke, like a fire was waking inside him. But the moment he sat down to work, the fire disappeared. He reached for comfort. He reached for noise. He reached for the easy reward that never asked anything from him. And day after day, the life he wanted stayed just out of reach. That is the puzzle many men are living inside now. Not laziness, not stupidity, something more dangerous. Their minds have been trained to crave fragments, not depth. Quick hits, not real progress. Constant stimulation, not real power. And a man who lives like that begins to feel it everywhere. He reads the same sentence 3 times. He forgets what he was about to do. He feels restless when the room gets quiet. He mistakes motion for achievement and exhaustion for effort. But here is the part most men never see. The enemy is not only the phone in your hand. It is the environment around you, the habits that soften you, the invisible leaks of attention that make strength impossible. If you want your life back, you do not begin by trying harder. You begin by seeing clearly. You begin by asking the right question. What is draining my mind before the day even starts? And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. If this speaks to you, stay with me, because what comes next will show you exactly why so many strong men are living like they are powerless, and how to take that power back one disciplined choice at a time. The man does not notice the theft at first. That is the cruel part. It does not arrive like a burglar through the front door. It comes like a whisper, like a small habit, like just one more glance at the screen before the work begins. Then another, and by the time the day is over, he feels tired in a way that has nothing to do with labor. He has been active but not effective, busy but not building, stimulated but strangely empty. There is a reason this feels so heavy. A distracted life does not merely waste time. It fractures a man's spirit. He starts one task and abandons it. He reads a paragraph and forgets the meaning. He sits down to think, and within seconds his hand moves toward the phone as if pulled by a string. This is not laziness. It is conditioning. The mind, once trained to expect constant novelty, becomes weak in silence. And silence is exactly where a strong life is made. I remember a man saying, "I don't even know what happened to me. I used to be able to focus." He was not speaking of age. He was speaking of erosion. Every notification, every quick video, every meaningless scroll had chipped away at his command over himself. The environment had won because it was designed to win. And most men, without realizing it, cooperate in their own defeat. But here is the puzzle. The same brain that can be broken by cheap dopamine can also be rebuilt by deliberate discipline. The same man who cannot sit still for 10 minutes can become the kind of man who sits in deep concentration for 2 hours, if he changes the battlefield. Not by force of will alone, but by wisdom. By removing temptation before temptation appears. By making the room itself serve his purpose. A disciplined man does not ask, "How do I resist every distraction?" He asks, "Why is it still near me?" The phone is not on the desk. The tabs are not open. The noise is not invited in. The world outside may be chaotic, but inside his space, order reigns. That is where power begins. And yet, even that is only the beginning. Because once the distractions are stripped away, a deeper enemy appears: boredom. The very thing most men flee from is the thing that restores them. In the quiet, the mind first rebels, then settles, then awakens. That is when the real work starts. So let me ask you something simple. When was the last time you sat alone without reaching for stimulation? When was the last time you let your mind grow still long enough to hear your own thoughts? If that question stings a little, good. That means you are still alive enough to change. And once you see what boredom can do in the hands of a serious man, you will understand why the next step is where everything begins to turn. The first trap is so ordinary that most men never suspect it. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It arrives like a habit. A quick glance at the screen, a small reward, a tiny escape, and then another. Before long, the mind is no longer working. It is reacting. It jumps at every vibration, every sound, every chance to avoid the quiet. That quiet, which should have been the place where strong thoughts are formed, becomes unbearable. The man tells himself he is just staying informed, just keeping up, just taking a break. But deep down, he knows the truth. His attention has been scattered into fragments, and fragments cannot build a life. You can see this everywhere now. At the dinner table, where one eye keeps drifting to the phone. In the office, where a simple task takes all day because the brain has been trained to crave interruptions. In the evening, when a man sits down to do something meaningful and somehow ends up exhausted without having created anything at all. He feels busy, but he is not moving forward. He feels connected, but he is inwardly divided. And a divided man is easy to control, because what is divided cannot command itself. The way out begins with a harder truth. Your environment is shaping you more than your willpower is. If your room is filled with noise, clutter, and constant digital invitations, you are not fighting a fair battle. You are trying to build discipline in a house designed to destroy it. So the wise man starts by making his surroundings sterile. Not cold, not empty of life, but clean enough that his mind can hear itself think. He puts the phone away. He removes the useless tabs. He turns off the alerts that do not serve his mission. He creates a space where attention is no longer ambushed every few seconds. And then comes the more difficult weapon, boredom. Most men flee from it. They reach for stimulation the moment silence appears. But boredom is not the enemy. It is the training ground. When a man sits with a blank page, a quiet room, or a long walk without music, something important happens. The brain stops begging for crumbs and begins searching for substance. The nervous system calms. The mind sharpens. Ideas that could never survive in noise begin to rise from beneath the surface. One man may call this uncomfortable. Another may call it the beginning of power. Because deep work is not just a productivity trick. It is a return to sovereignty. It is the moment when a man stops leasing his mind to the world and starts governing it himself. He learns that focus is not found by accident. It is earned, protected, and defended. And once he experiences a single hour of true, unbroken concentration, he begins to understand what he has been missing all these years. The question is not whether he can focus. The question is whether he is willing to reclaim what was stolen. And once that question is answered, the next step becomes impossible to ignore. The man who begins to understand this battle sees something painful at first. The problem is not simply lack of willpower. It is an environment built like a trap. Every screen, every alert, every endless scroll is asking for a fragment of his mind. And when a man keeps answering every call, his thoughts never have a chance to settle into anything strong. He becomes busy in the way a broken machine is busy, moving without producing, reacting without choosing. That is why the first step is not heroic. It is honest. Look around your life and ask yourself, what is stealing my attention before I even know it is gone? The phone on the nightstand, the television humming in the background, the constant urge to just check one more thing. These are not innocent habits. They are tiny leaks in the vessel of your mind. And a man with a leaking vessel cannot carry enough water to build a future. There was a moment not long ago when an older man sat at his kitchen table with his coffee growing cold. He looked at his son across the room and said, almost in a whisper, I used to think I was tired. I wasn't tired. I was scattered. That sentence carried the weight of years. The son did not answer right away. He just watched his father stare at the phone, then set it face down as if setting down a weapon. That is what begins to happen when a man wakes up. He stops treating distraction like entertainment and starts seeing it as erosion. So he makes his room simpler. He charges the phone outside the bedroom. He removes the small temptations from the desk. He keeps the tools of creation close and the tools of interruption far away. Suddenly, the silence becomes visible. At first, it feels uncomfortable. His mind complains. It reaches for stimulation the way a thirsty man reaches for water. But he does not obey immediately. He sits in the empty space and lets boredom do its work. Because boredom, when not escaped too quickly, becomes a furnace. It burns away the false urgency. It teaches the nervous system that nothing terrible happens when the world goes quiet. And in that quiet, something powerful returns. The ability to stay. This is where deep work begins. Not with inspiration, but with resistance. 10 minutes without checking. Then 20. Then an hour where the mind no longer jumps at shadows. And slowly, the man who once could not read a page without drifting finds himself able to think in full sentences again. Able to finish what he starts. Able to hold one noble goal long enough for it to become real. And once a man tastes that kind of focus, he never looks at his old life the same way again. The question is not whether he is busy. The question is whether his attention belongs to him now, or if the world still owns it. The first real battle is not against the phone in your hand, but against the part of you that reaches for it without thinking. That is where the chain begins. Not in a dramatic collapse, but in 1,000 small surrenderings. A glance at the screen, a quick refresh, a few seconds stolen from silence. Then another, and another. Before long, the day is no longer yours. But the man who learns to reclaim his attention begins to notice something powerful. His mind is not broken. It has been trained. Trained by noise. Trained by interruption. Trained to expect reward before effort. The good news is that anything trained can be retrained. A distracted mind is not a life sentence. It is a condition, and conditions can be changed. Imagine a room stripped of temptation. No glowing screens. No browser tabs multiplying like rats in the dark. No background noise feeding your restlessness. Just a table, a notebook, a task, and the honest discomfort of being alone with your own mind. At first, this feels almost violent. The silence can expose how dependent you have become on constant stimulation. But if you stay there, if you do not flee from the emptiness, something begins to shift. Boredom is not your enemy. It is the doorway back to power. In boredom, the nervous system stops begging. The appetite for cheap dopamine weakens. The mind, no longer entertained, starts to rebuild its muscles. A man who can sit with boredom without panic has already separated himself from the crowd. He no longer needs the world to feed him every second. He can think. He can plan. He can finish. That is why deep work feels so rare now. It is not because the task is impossible. It is because the modern man has forgotten how to remain in one place long enough for greatness to take shape. But when he does, when he protects a block of time like it is sacred, when he turns off the noise and enters the work fully, he discovers a quiet authority returning to him. Not excitement, not motivation, authority. And that authority changes everything. Conversations become sharper. Decisions become cleaner. The body feels calmer. The spirit feels less divided. A man no longer dragged by every impulse begins to stand taller, even in silence. He does not need to announce his discipline. It shows itself in the way he moves through the day. If this truth is landing in you, you already know how rare it is to hear it spoken plainly. So if this message is helping you reconnect the scattered pieces of your attention, give it a like and let that be your silent agreement with the man you are becoming. And ask yourself this: what has been stealing your focus for years, and what would your life look like if you finally took it back? Because in the next moment, we are going deeper into the final step, where distraction stops being a habit and becomes something you can defeat for good. And so the puzzle comes into focus. It was never just about the phone in your hand, the tabs on your screen, or the noise outside your door. Those were only the thieves at the gate. The real battle was always inside the mind of the man who kept surrendering his attention one piece at a time. Every ping, every scroll, every meaningless refresh trained him to live in fragments. And a man who lives in fragments cannot build a life that lasts. He can react, he can consume, but he cannot create. Yet something changes when he finally understands the cost. He sits alone in a quiet room. The screen is dark. The world is still. At first, that silence feels uncomfortable, almost insulting. His hand reaches for the device that is no longer there. His mind begs for escape. But he stays. He breathes. He lets the boredom rise like smoke, and he does not run from it. In that moment, he begins to reclaim himself. Because boredom was never the enemy. It was the doorway. On the other side of that doorway lives focus. Not the brittle kind that lasts 5 minutes, but the deep, steady concentration of a man who can sit with one task and not flinch. A man who no longer asks, "How do I feel right now?" but instead asks, "What must be built?" That is the difference between drifting and leading, between weakness and command, between a life spent being entertained and a life spent becoming someone. The strong man does not wait for motivation to arrive dressed in gold. He arranges his environment. He removes the noise. He makes distraction expensive. He protects his attention the way a king protects his crown. And when the day grows difficult, he remembers that his mind is not a playground for every impulse that passes through it. It is a throne room. What he allows in will shape the man he becomes. If this message struck something in you, give it a like so it can reach another man who is still losing his best hours to the smallest temptations. And tell me this, what is the one distraction you are finally ready to eliminate for good? If you want to keep building a stronger mind, a steadier life, and the discipline to finish what you start, subscribe now. The next step is not about learning more. It is about becoming the kind of man who can hold his focus long enough to turn knowledge into power.